Good morning and welcome to our Beyond Budgeting, Learn How You Can Leverage Business Analytics and Free You from the Budget Process webinar. My name is Lisa David. I'm a partner at eCapital Advisors. Just by way of a little bit of introduction, eCapital Advisors specializes in helping our customers implement business analytics solutions and capability to their organization. So what that means is we leverage all existing data that our customers have and help our customers really transition both their planning, budgeting, forecasting, and analytical modeling capability into business analytics solutions that drive further insight into their business on a much more timely basis. There's no better way to highlight our customers than to highlight our customer success. One of our featured customers is Mom Brands. Mom Brands faced many of the consistent problems we see in our customer base, where they had manual consolidation over 100+ Excel spreadsheets for both their budget and forecasting process. I'd like to play for you a quick little video showing you the impact of business analytics to Mom Brands.
Would you mind describing to me Malt-O-Meal as a company?
It's an exciting time right now for Malt-O-Meal. We're right now bridging between being a small company and a large growth company. In a flat cereal category right now, Malt-O-Meal is experiencing phenomenal growth. We are the growth leader in the grocery category right now. With all that growth comes quite a bit of complexity, so we are really learning how to take that small approach that we used to and leverage it more for the future. So,
how would you articulate to a business user that is traditionally leveraging Excel for this process today in an organization, how different that experience is leveraging TM1?
Oh, we actually highlighted our first TM1 experience in our executive S&OP meeting last month. And instead of pulling screenshots of all of our Excel reports, we actually pulled up the tool and we navigated through the meeting using the tool. So the difference is you're not sorting, you're not using different formulas. We've built reports that it's one click away, anything you need at your fingertips. So in the middle of a meeting, a question comes up and the answer is right there.
Process improvement has even come down to your financial numbers, and I think you're outpacing your competition. Can you talk to how this visibility has even helped you?
What it does is it's definitely shortened up the cycle time between looking at your first cut P&L for your budget and what you're going to look at for the next year, and you go back and you change something in the capital plan. I mean, that can be done within minutes versus days is what happens, because that will flow all the way through. Also, if we make changes in the S&OP plan, because our TM1 financial system is basically set up to follow the inventory. You follow the inventory from when it's getting made, where it gets made, how it gets moved to where it gets into the distribution center, and where it goes to the customer. I think one of the greatest things that we've been able to do much better than before is be able to forecast out. Forecast out commodity changes in our business. Agricultural commodities are starting to move more than what they have done traditionally, and so we can see further out as to what kind of cost structure we're going to be looking at in the future. We'd be able to look at against diesel and transportation costs, and so we have a much more forward-looking, future-looking vision as to what we're doing and what we're going to be approached with over the next 6 months. We are able to see through Mom Insights. We can pull up everything, even through POS data out of Walmart. We can pull all that and take a look at that and compare it all the way through what's being made. So you can see all of that, and it's on a dashboard format. So every day our executives can come in and we have a dashboard where they can go look at supply chain, they can look at S&OP, they can look at the financials, they can look at products, they can look at some certain levels of inventory, and ask any questions they want. One of the things is that, because the way it came out is that our commodity buyer, we've been able to cycle all these things when we're going through the budgeting cycle, and more information comes in or things change, and we keep going back to our commodity guy saying, hey, what does this do to you? What does this do to you? Or the price has changed and we put in a new hedge. You got to get that in. And he's like, oh, I got to go through all these spreadsheets to get this in, to tie out my physical, to know where I am against my hedge, against my basis calculation, against all of these things. And so we're taking those crazy spreadsheets that he has, putting them into a cube and letting it flow through.
Just wanted to give you that highlight of customer success and how our customers use business analytics capabilities. Now I'd like to turn it over to our featured speaker today. I'd like to welcome Steve Player, who serves as the North American Program Director for the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. Steve works with Beyond Budgeting Roundtable member companies to implement continuous planning processes in their organization. Steve has over 30 years experience of improving performance management and implementing strategic planning processes across corporations. Steve, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And watching that video, mom brands I'm not familiar with, but I sure know the name Malto-Meal, so very exciting to see what they're doing with analytics, and we'll talk about how that kind of ties into what we're doing and how things move forward. Let me talk briefly a little bit about this whole approach to how do we plan and how do we move forward. On slide 5, we'll see coming up that when you really look at your budget and your planning process, many people will really start with a clean sheet of paper. And they'll talk about, particularly when we're in tough times and we're having to manage expenses very closely, you'll get the edict from on top that says, hey, just start with a clean sheet of paper and rethink everything. And oftentimes this becomes a zero-based budgeting exercise, which typically only happens once. And the real reality is unless you're truly a greenfield startup, it's not a real useful way of thinking about the business, in that, what you really are is much more like a ship out on the ocean. So the next part of the slide will display that. And what that is really the cumulative cost and capability structure of your organization. When you think about any business of any size or duration, what you really are at any given point in time is the accumulation of your past decisions, what products and services you choose to offer, what customers you address, where you're physically located, the processes that you use, the equipment that you've bought. And what you've built in your organization is really a conversion machine that takes the inputs of your raw materials, of your people's time, of your patents, of your ideas. It takes that through a series of processes that converts those raw inputs into outputs, which are your products and services that you serve the customers. Now, hopefully, the capability to produce products and services and therefore generate revenue results in revenue that are in excess of the cost. Otherwise, you're riding in a leaky ship, and you got to get that fixed pretty quickly. But the reality is if you'll think about your business, you're much more like a ship out on the ocean. So when we talk about budgeting or planning or forecasting, what we're really talking about is what needs to happen to transform the ship that we're in into the ship we need to become in the future. Now, when you think about it, your 5-year plan is your vision of what you want to become. So you really think about that as the ship 3 to 5 years out. What do I need to become? What kind of new products and services? What kind of new markets am I reaching? What kind of new capabilities do I need to have? So what you're really trying to do with planning is to try to lay out the steps that you're going to have to take to make that happen. And it doesn't happen with the change of a pen or the change of a keystroke. It typically has to happen with a series of projects and initiatives. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens literally through time. And so we want to focus on that and focus on what do we have to change and what guides us in terms of that. Before I move off this slide, I want to give one last question for everybody. When you think about this ship analogy, in my seminars, I often ask attendees, if our ship is a cruise ship, what cabin does the finance get? When you go on a cruise, you want to know where you're going and you want to know, what cabin you have. And a lot of people, they'll start throwing out ideas that we're, down near the engine room, and most engineers don't want us anywhere near them. One attendee told me once we're sitting on the hatch to keep the auditors from wandering around aimlessly. But I'll submit to you, in most situations, finance organizations that have really kind of painted themselves into a situation where we could best be described as we're on the back of the boat. We're looking at the historical costs, we're looking at the past, and we're looking at the wake that the boat's generating. And we're yelling over our shoulder to the captain, we seem to be going about this fast and we may be turning. And the problem is, regardless of what powerful tools or systems that you implement, there's just not a lot of strategic value finance can add staring off the back of the boat. So our challenge as finance professionals is to get off the back of the boat and get up there on the bridge beside the captain and start providing some useful analysis that helps us sail forward, that helps us address the future. that not only, has the vision of where we're trying to go, but is focused on trying to help get there. And that's what we're going to talk about today, some simple things about why people are moving this direction and where they're headed to. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about forecasting. Typically, when you're putting together your annual budget, what happens is you'll put together a series of steps that you're going to take and check marks, quarterly positions, if you will. You might break it down to monthly positions, but it basically lays out a plan of where you're going to try to do and how you're going to zigzag to reach your target. And basically, most of what masquerades as planning is usually detailed arguments about the assumptions that you should be using, and which is really kind of interesting since most of the assumptions are going to be wrong. But in any event, you go through that whole process. Many of you may be involved with it right now, but you go through that process and you come up with a plan or a budget. And that's okay, except as you begin to get into the year, the next slide will show us kind of what happens. Typically, somewhere along the line, something comes in and blows us off course. In this situation, a storm has put us off course, and we found ourselves kind of way off where we are. Now, if you're in management accounting, if you're trying to be useful, how useful it is to ask people, why aren't you in the dotted line? What are you doing to get back to the dotted line? At some point when major volatility hits and you're so far off the dotted line, that continued question doesn't get you where you need to be. In many cases, if you look at annual budgeting, one of the reasons people are abandoning it and moving on is that dotted line was based on what we thought was going to happen in the middle of the previous summer. And when things blow us off course for that, it's just not real useful to keep coming back to that, because now we're doing varied explanations and we're explaining why we're not doing what we thought we were going to do in the middle of the previous summer. Once we've had one good discussion about why we're blown off, to keep coming back to every month and having that same discussion over and over again is not real useful, because the captain's not worried about the middle of last summer. He's worried about what's ahead of us and what are we doing to come back, because our target out there is still the same, but now we've got to come to an alternative course. And that's where forecasting comes in. And so we would work in a useful finance organization will put together a forecast. In my seminars, the next slide shows kind of we'll put together a forecast, but oftentimes if you're really being realistic, the forecast doesn't have you going to a safe place. In this case, our forecast shows that we're going to hit the rocks. And that's pretty dangerous. So once I put that forecast out there, what do we want the captain to do with that forecast? Well, since we're all in that same boat with him, we want him to do everything he can not to hit those rocks, because we're liable to have bad stuff happen to us if we hit the rocks. And so we want to start, helping him move forward. So in terms of forecasting, finance can help if they'll start increasing the forecast frequency. When you're in dire situations, you need rapid information. We'll also, when we start forecasting, we'll modify what we forecast. Some people want to forecast in extreme detail at the chart of account level, but when you're in a real tough situation, you hit the rocks, we don't need to be telling the captain mundane information that just because we can. We need to hone in on the key drivers of information, the key things, the key variables that are pushing us into those rocks. And we need to talk about different alternative plans to avoid those rocks, different scenarios that we might be able to avoid them. And we want to help that captain think through, and then we want to frequently update those forecasts as new information comes in about the current and the storm and the winds and the things that are pushing us into those rocks, because we want to help the captain plan the most productive, the most safe way to get to our ultimate journey. And we go through that, and if we're lucky, the next slide will show we'll be able to kind of miss those rocks and get to the target. Now, one thing I often talk about is the issue of forecast accuracy, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but let me make the point here. A lot of people are under the misconception that forecast accuracy is the supreme goal. It's the objective of what you're trying to do. Well, in this case, my forecast said we were going to hit the rocks, but we didn't hit the rocks. So what could you say about my forecast accuracy? Well, I think your only conclusion you can make is I was 100% inaccurate. I was wrong. But then I'd ask the question, was it useful? And I think we'd all agree, yeah, it was useful in terms of alerting us to the danger. It helped looking at different alternatives. So when you think about forecasting, the goal is really to optimize the outcome. And the whole purpose of forecasting, the purpose of moving beyond budgets, is to get a better planning system, to help the management team optimize the outcome. And if you'll rethink your fundamentals of what we're trying to do with budgeting, planning, and forecasting, I think you'll find we can deliver a more accountable system, a more flexible system that can adapt to the changing world we're in, and a much more useful system to help the captain of our company sail the ship. And again, if we focus on that, we'll have a better way to go. Now, let me move on to the next slide, because we're going to spend a lot of time really talking about a couple more things about forecasting, and then I'm going to get into the main meat of our topic, which is predictive logic diagrams. again, the key concept I want you to take away from that previous slide is a target is what you would like to have happen, okay? The target set by where we're trying to get from the strategic plan, it's kind of our aspiration. It's what we would like to have happen. A forecast needs to be what we think will have happen based on a plan of what we intend to do. Okay, now the forecast doesn't automatically hit the target. If your forecast always hits your target, you're kicking in trust me forecast, particularly if you're not asking people for the details of what they got to do to make those targets happen. So the target and the forecast are two different things. Forecast is where we're going, target is where we want to go. To the extent they're not the same place, we need to keep thinking of our mitigating steps, our actions in terms of where we're trying to get to. And so keep those apart. Now, if you take a look at those in our book, Future Ready, How to Master Business Forecasting, it shows in and goes in to describe some different attributes. So the bottom half of this slide will describe 5 key attributes that we need to think about. We need forecasts that are timely, that are actionable, that are reliable, that are aligned, and finally that are cost effective. Now that mnemonic TARAC doesn't spell anything, but if I flip it around and spell carrot, carrot's the measure of fine jewels, so that's how we get to the 5 levels of diamond level forecasting. Let me kind of briefly go through those. We don't have time in today's webcast because we want to get more into the analytics, but let me kind of briefly talk to you about what these 5 attributes mean on the next slide. When I talk about a forecast being timely, we need it in time to take action. In our situation previously where we were facing hitting the rocks, we need to have a forecast that allows us time to recognize the problem and to steer around those problems and time to take action. So we need an adequate forecast horizon. Now, if we're an ocean tanker, we move and react slowly. If we're a motorboat, we move and react fast. So from a timeliness point of view, it really depends on how fast your organization can react. From an actionable point of view, actionable means that we need the forecast that can move forward. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on the rest of the seminar kind of talking about that, so I'll hold on that point and come back to that in a minute when I talk about predictive logic diagrams. To reliable means we want to be free from bias. I mean, quite frankly, in terms of reliability, that's the word we use instead of forecast accuracy. I'm going to basically change the outcome, but I want to make sure what the information I'm using can be relied on, and it can be relied on if it's free from bias. So we do a lot of forecast measurement to test reliability and to look for bias. Align simply means we're all focused on the same thing. Have you ever been in a situation where sales says we're going here and operations doesn't believe and says, no, we're going here, and finance doesn't believe either one of them, so their adjusting plan says, no, we're going to go over here? In most organizations, you need to be fully aligned to the outcome that you're trying to get to. One forecast, one version of the truth in terms of where we're going. And finally, for this forecasting to be useful, it needs to be cost effective. We don't need to try to do an annual budget exercise 4 times a year. We need a light touch, driver-based approach that we can do very, very rapidly that allows us to do a lot of what ifs and do it very, very cost effectively. So that means we're doing the right stuff the first time, not multiple iterations back and forth, and we're doing it in a way that we can do it with some automation and move forward. That's where TM1 comes in as a very, very powerful tool. In the video that Lisa and the crew ran earlier when they were describing what happened at Mom's Brands, they referenced TM1. Most of you may be Cognos customers and very familiar with TM1. For those of you who are not, it's a very, very powerful tool that's at the center of IBM's business analytics approach. It's a tool that I've been familiar with and worked with in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable for close to a decade now. And the thing that always amazed me about TM1 was the tremendous user satisfaction, the kind of really high user marks that it always got. So if you're not familiar with it, I urge you to check it out because it's a very, very powerful engine that drives a lot of good, transparent information and lets you do a lot of wonderful things with it. Now let me move over and let's talk a little bit about this point of actionable. In the next slide, I'll kind of, when you talk about actionable, if you have your ship and it's going to hit the rocks, what you want to be able to do is understand that in time to be able to deviate and move away from that and plot an alternative course. To do that, you're going to take mitigating actions. Now, when you're modeling what's going to happen, you typically we use 3 types of models: mathematical models, statistical models, and judgmental models. Now, the mathematical models are the one we really like. They're the one that allow us to get to predictive logic. With a mathematical model, we're looking at the inputs and we're understanding the cause and effects of those inputs, And what we really want to model with the mathematical is, if I do this, what happens to that? So if I begin to steer differently, how fast does the ship turn around? So if we were modeling this ship's trajectory in a mathematical model, it would be a physics approach. It's how hard do we push the rudder, what's our speed, what's the weight of the ship. Obviously, the heavier the ship, the less responsive it's going to be because it's riding lower in the water. So we run through a mathematical model of what's out there. If you think a mathematical model of your organization, it can begin to focus on the key drivers. A statistical model we often will use when we don't really know the pure math, but we can see the characteristics of performance. And so we can begin to use statistical functions because we study, the different function curves, and begin to get a model based on statistics that begin to predict behavior. So use regression analysis and tools like that to predict behavior. The third model, judgmental, is one that we all use, and it basically bases on our intuition. It's based on our gut feel, if you will. You'll always have that, if no other reason, to use judgment to say whether your mathematical model and statistical model are still valid, still holding up, or whether some external factor may have caused you to want to check that or question whether or not you've still got the relationships right. If you have a change in the environment, a change in tax law, a change in certain key variables, your judgment will warn you that that model, while historically held up, may not continue to hold up. So you'll use all three of those. So we're going to hone in today's discussion really on this mathematical model and jump into that. The next slide, really, a mathematical model is really just a predictive logic diagram. And by that, we're going to look at kind of a driver-based way to move to forecasting. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the approach in the next slide and then take you through how we construct it. In this situation, what we were trying to predict for this client was revenue, which we depict down in the bottom right-hand corner. And then we worked back logically through all the key steps, all the way back to the beginning to really say, what is the cause and effect? And so I'm going to take you through kind of quickly how we build one of these with a thought toward helping you think through how you build that same kind of predictive model for your organization. So again, we're trying to forecast revenue. We want to understand the key things, the key variables. So the next slide, we'll start that process. When we look at revenue, we find it's really a function of the number of installations we have times the average selling price. So it's really kind of a simple volume equation. And when you're right at the edge of kind of what creates revenue, it's usually pretty apparent. You usually can figure this out. So we start there and we begin drawing backwards, okay, average selling price time installation. And then we ask the question, okay, what causes installation? What gives us the trigger for that? So in the next slide, we begin to work our way back up to the upper left. We track back, and we see that installations are really a function of what got released to production, which is what cleared sales. Now, in this client situation, the sales process wasn't just a simple sales call. In many cases, this was a big-ticket item, so many of the customers had to finance their sales. So even after you got a guy to say yes, you had to sweat bullets for a little while to make sure he cleared financing, he could get his credit in place to be able to afford the sale. So you kind of work through those loops. Those clearing go into production, and you've got kind of the beginning of the system. Now, still we're on the income statement. If you notice, both gross sales and net sales would still be on the income statement. Now let's keep working back up the curve. What creates gross sales? And so we go back up the next step, and we look at the correlations, and what we feel it's really a function of how many sales calls you had and whether they were productive. So using a simple metric like the success ratio, we can begin to track it. Now, when you get deep into analytics, there's a lot more measures you could track along with the success ratio. You could track the unproductive ratio and try to really get some quality analytics about why they didn't close or what happened with them. Did the appointment actually get made? So you can dig into the unsuccessful and begin to learn things about how to make it more successful, but again, you're working through. So you look at this, it's really a function of the number of calls. In this client situation, the number of calls that were needed or available, kind of the actual capacity of the system, was based on a couple of corporate policies. The corporate decided how many salespeople they'd have, and they gave every salesperson 2 sales calls a day, 6 days a week. So for each salesman you add, you have a theoretical capacity of 12 sales calls a week. So that's kind of the sales piece. Now, again, here we've begun to move back, still on the income statement side. We got obviously truck sales, sales cost, sales compensation, if you will, but we're beginning to pick up some physical things that begin to happen. The physical sales call, the number of branches that we have, the training that the salespeople have could certainly be correlated with their effectiveness and so forth. So again, working the logic diagram even back further, coming to sales calls, what creates that? And we loop back and we see that sales calls are really the way it works is leads are worked by a phone bank. The phone bank's function is to take the leads and convert them into sales appointments. There are a number of phone operators who take inbound leads and try to apportion them out by the local geographic branch, and then get on the phone to try to set the appointment with those customers to get the salesman right out in front of them. Now, again, this is a big ticket item to sell, so it needs a bit of time, so they budget about 2 to 3 hours for each sales call. And so that's the reason they only give them 2 sales calls a day. And there's also has to be travel time between the locations and so forth. So basically, sales calls get issued to the branch men go out and schedule, they go out and have the customer calls, so there's kind of a potential leakage there in terms of could get issued to the branch. What happens if the salesman gets tied up with his first appointment, he can't get to his second appointment, and you have a situation where you're flowing these leads down. And again, look, we've captured in red the key metrics that we're tracking throughout this. So we're working it back, we're looking at the correlation ratios, how many of the leads get set, and so forth, how it falls through. Work all the way back to the next step. We can go up even further, and to get to the sales calls, we can see what's really happening. How is the marketing department developing sales mediums, direct mail, television ads, phone campaigns, radio campaigns? What are all the different ways we're trying to identify potential customers and create a lead that can then be followed up on? So essentially, this logic diagram goes all the way back to where we're bombarding the customer universe with advertising media, and we can see how things move forward, see where they go, and how they move left to right throughout the organization. Now, once you have a diagram like that, there's a number of very, very powerful things that you can do to begin to understand your business. You can begin to understand the cycle time it takes for something to happen. You know, how long does it take for things to move through? In many cases, these tools are used for improvement projects. What led us to build this initially for the first time was we were helping a client understand what they did whenever they had a shortfall in revenue. And typically what would happen is somebody would come up with some investment money, say $500,000, and they'd want to apply it to try to juice the sales process and move things forward. Now, if you have a logic diagram, you could easily ask the question, if I had $1 million to invest, where would I invest it? And in most cases, what we'd see is whatever money they came up with would always get invested in new lead generation campaigns. And the problem with that is it rarely worked, at least not in the quarter they were trying to correct. And you can easily see from this kind of a waterfall chart what can happen. If I push more leads into the lead generation, that doesn't, they've got to flow from there to the phone bank, from the phone banks out to the sales force. And oftentimes the waterfall of how these things move through the system results in a lengthy delay that delays your ultimate return. It also allows you, if you're a study of Ellie Goldratt's theory of constraints, a logic diagram helps you analyze where the key constraints are. If you look at this system and look at it closely, you can find the key constraints. In this situation, it's really at the sales office, and really that's the bottleneck, because this system, no matter how many leads you stack upstream, it can't move any faster than the number of leads moving through the sales point. And again, we give each salesman 2 leads a day, 6 days a week. So the maximum capacity this could operate at is 12 leads per salesman per week. And that bottleneck is really based on a couple of management decisions: how many salespeople to have and how many leads per day. Could we increase capacity if we gave them 3 calls a day? Might be hard to get a salesman to work over that many hours. Might be hard to get customers to take morning appointments. Yeah, those are constraints that we're, physical constraints that we're working with, but that's what we have to look at. If we took that money and invested in Salesforce training so they could close at a higher ratio, that would yield kind of immediately more revenues for no additional cost. So once you have a logic diagram, you can begin to not only predict what will happen, but you also can begin to analyze different alternatives. Now, when you look at that throw-through, think about the bottom right's mostly financial. Up in the upper left-hand side, we're mostly physical. And so you begin to see a lot of things that cause your revenues to happen, your levers of control. You also begin to get early warning signs. And the main benefit of a predictive logic diagram is to help your forecasting team get early warning signals of potential trouble or potential opportunity. The faster you can see things, the more lead time you have to react. And therein lies the real power of predictive logic diagrams. It gives us ways to understand what's coming at us in time to really take action. And the more we can move beyond the financial world back into the physical things that cause the financial results to come, the more lead time we have, the more upstream we have to be able to adjust and move forward. And that's really what we're trying to drive to with these forecasting systems. Not just better numbers, but deeper understanding of why and what we can do about it. Now, on the next slide, I just want to give you a quick recap. This forecasting is just one of the principles that are part of the 12 Beyond Budgeting principles. We had several articles from CFO and other magazines covering our work, but rolling forecasts are a powerful tool, probably the easiest and most accessible tool for people to begin with, but there's a lot more to Beyond Budgeting when you really think about what you use budgets for. So I'd urge you to think about our Beyond Budgeting principles. Most of the discussion today is in the bottom right-hand corner about planning and controls. And those are the most physical things that can be seen. Those are the things that people grasp to. But Beyond Budgeting really talks about changing the way you set goals, changing the way you reward, and ultimately leading to the more powerful leadership principles on the right-hand side. How do you get people more engaged? How do you get people to be more transparent, to drive the business forward? And that's, I urge you to look at Beyond Budgeting, but look at the total message and all the points, and I think you'll see a powerful way to work. Now, at this point, I'll be available for some Q&A here in a little bit, but I want to turn it back over to Lisa and the crew. They've got some really exciting things to show you about what's happening with mobile reporting. We take all these tools and begin to take them into the field to get deeper engagement with the front lines. Some really, really powerful stuff about how this is becoming much more available to you. Lisa?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, as Steve mentioned, one of the neat perspectives that we have available to our customers now is once we have set up these forecasting applications and solutions, one of the things our customers would like to do is present the results of how we're doing compared to that forecast in a very easy to use, easy to consume type visual reporting. What we're able to do with the business analytics capabilities is also with the iPad revolution that has taken place over the last couple of years. A lot of our team members are attending board meetings, customer presentations, all bringing an iPad to the meeting. Instead of having to wait to get back to your office, to your laptop to see a report, we're able to see that information through our iPad offering. So if you can see here, I'm just showing you a simulation of my iPad, and we have an IBM Cognos mobile app. I will click into that. It just brings up some of my reports that I can leverage. So once we have that forecasting system set up, we can begin to present either financial data, sales data, operational data out to our team members so they can leverage that information very quickly and easily. So you can come in here and see your balance sheet. I'm able to see it across different currencies. I can toggle between go to the income statement and just drill through my data in a very easy to navigate perspective. I'm going to come into another financial overview. So what you can see is this really is what we call polished dashboard set. It's leveraged and can be viewed through their laptop. It can be viewed through their iPad, and it's the same exact look and feel. Our customers have had a huge amount of customer adoption by leveraging this style of report. Underneath this application is our forecasting solutions that Steve was talking about. This is just a dashboard of my financial results from a net income perspective. I can toggle and see the difference in the gross profit breakdown, the variance over time. I can have a slider bar on my time dimension. I can pull into my working capital. I can drill into further information. I can click on my profitability and see my key metrics. Again, from a bar line chart perspective, if I'd like to see the grid, that's just a push of the button as well. I'll now come into like a sales dashboard perspective where our customers are modeling their revenue and sales that they expect to generate and comparing that to the actuals. It's become a very huge use of this type of reporting. You'll notice that I can click on an overview. This just gives me my key metrics across the company, basically my revenue increase, my percentages of sales growth, and my win-loss perspective. One of the things that the iPad brings with it and customers have wanted to do for years is be able to comment and interact across the organization. I can hit the pencil button up here, and you'll notice that I can come in here and I can write right on, leveraging the native features of the iPad. I'll hit email. That's exactly how that report will be delivered to an email account so that we have a meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon. You'll know exactly what I plan to discuss. I'll come into the market analysis. You'll notice that I'm just toggling between, in this case, an OEM distributor, showing me that if I click on California, the customer details that make up California, and I can drill into a specific customer, and it will talk about the product revenue. I can come over here to a shipments perspective. Then I can drill up and down between my product lines. I can also say I would like to look at the table. I'm not a chart person. So again, very easy to navigate, kind of a no training needed reporting, presenting the results of maybe those forecasting applications as well as any actual results. What our customers love is they're very, very polished, visually appealing. The customers articulate that these really enhance meetings that they're having across the business. Instead of having to spend the first 20 minutes navigating maybe a performance report that's a 50-page PDF, if this is the report, they can get through it much quicker and get much more to a strategy conversation faster. I'll come into the metric analysis here. Again, I'm toggling between my new business and my renewal business, and you can see how the data will change. Right now I'm looking at national region. I can look at it at a regional level. I can come into the regional analysis. Again, as I pick one of the regions, if I pick the Midwest, it'll show me, again, how I'm performing in the Midwest. Just wanted to highlight a couple of our samples here. So again, this application is just leveraging our presentation layer of our reporting engine on top of these forecasting applications. And we find the combination of having the forecasting process and analytics built into the forecasting application, but being able to have the visualization of the dashboard polish on top is really driving tremendous client value. I can just come in again to an overview perspective here. Here's where I can have my actual sales, my budgeted sales, and where I'm at from a percentage to budget and a percentage to prior year. This could be different segments of your company. Here I'm looking at 2 different segments of a product company that is a seafood-based organization. A lot of our customers want to see things. Some people like to view their data in dollars. Some people want to see it in pounds. Again, I'm just able to change that. This shows me the industry breakdown of where I distribute these segments across industrial, restaurant. Again, I can change and the data will reflect any of those changes in the pie chart. A big area that our customers want to do, no matter what their industry is the top 5, bottom 5. And again, being able to see in a very quick fashion my top 5 customers, my bottom 5 customers, my top 5 sales reps, my top 5 products, margin percentage by product. Again, very reflective of the industry you're in, but I'm able to just toggle between year to date, month to date. I can drill into a customer and say, within that month to date, what product are they actually is making up that top 5 detail as well. And then again, bringing in any regional or geographic perspective. With that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you for some Q&A.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that. It amazes me how fast this entire visualization has taken off, and I think in many cases it's taken off faster than we're able to digest it. If you think about the iPad, if you go back about 40 months, it didn't exist. That product's less than 4 years old. So just what it's been put out there has just got people, I think, kind of gaping. We see pictures, and we're now only beginning to start to harvest what we can do with it. And so I'm very, very excited as a generation of finance people, as we bring people in that are growing up with this, what they're going to be able to take off and do with this is going to be pretty amazing for us.
Well, I have a question, if I may. My name is Michael.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, you referenced that a lot of companies use the rolling forecast, and they seem to be really big companies. American Express, I think, was mentioned, Target. Does this approach work for smaller and mid-sized companies?
It certainly does. I mean, a lot of the examples we tend to use are the larger companies simply because we would try to find the brand name recognition. So American Express, Statoil, Unilever, all have used and moved to this. If you've seen our CFO magazine articles, those were covered in those. But we have a number of Beyond Budgeting members that are small to mid-sized companies. I think a couple of really small ones we're working with. We've got a credit union in the Midwest that's got less than 100 employees. We've got a public relations firm in the Chicago area that's about $10 million in revenues. So yes, it can work for smaller companies, and it really is just a matter of applying it. In many cases, smaller companies are easier to work with because the decision-making happens very, very quickly. And if you've got a basic structure, getting to your logic diagrams, you only have a handful of kind of key drivers to your revenue that you can really focus on. So with smaller companies, getting to the logic diagram of really what's critical to being successful in the mission really helps focus the management team. So it takes just a little bit of time to put it down, but I would strongly recommend small to mid-sized business to really consider this.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for participating in this webinar. Really appreciate your insight and bringing that Beyond Budgeting experience to this presentation. Appreciate your time today. Thank you all for participating, and have a great remainder of the day.